The door of the cafe burst open with a sharp crash. Every conversation froze. In stepped a young woman with chestnut hair tied in a messy bun, her coat half open, cheeks flushed from the biting winter wind and fury. Her name was Lana Miller, event planner, overworked and underpaid, but fiercely loyal. She'd spent the last 3 nights comforting her best friend Emma, who had just discovered her fiancé was cheating on her. Emma had shown Lana the proof, a photo, a man in a deep red suit having coffee with another woman at this exact cafe every Thursday. And today was Thursday. So when Lana saw the man in the red suit, her heart ignited. "You disgusting liar," she shouted, her voice trembling with rage. "Do you even know what you've done to her? To Emma? She believed in you. She defended you when everyone else called you heartless." The man looked up slowly from his cup. His expression didn't flinch, calm, almost cold. His tailored suit screamed wealth and control. The woman sitting opposite him, elegant, perfectly poised, gave Lana a look that could freeze a storm. "Excuse me?" the man said, his tone clipped. "Who are you talking to?" Lana took a step closer, trembling but defiant. "Don't you dare pretend. You're the one who's been lying to my best friend for months. You think because you're rich, you can treat people like trash? Well, not today." The cafe had gone silent. All eyes were on her. The barista froze mid-pour. A waiter dropped a spoon. Someone whispered, "Isn't that Gabriel Costa?" But Lana didn't hear them. Her anger was blind. "I should pour that coffee on your smug face," she hissed. "You're nothing but—" "Lana!" a voice called behind her. She turned and saw him, the real culprit. Emma's fiancé, Matt, standing on the sidewalk outside, holding a bouquet of roses and wearing the exact same color suit. Her breath caught. Her stomach dropped. Oh no. The man in front of her, the one she just humiliated in front of dozens of people, wasn't Matt. He was Gabriel Costa, CEO of Costa Group, one of the most powerful tech companies in the country. And the woman beside him was Eleanor Costa, his mother, the founder, the matriarch, the kind of woman who could buy this cafe with her spare change. Lana's words died in her throat. Her knees felt weak. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I thought—" But it was too late. Gabriel's gaze was sharp as a blade. "Security," he said calmly. Before the guards could move, Eleanor raised her hand. "Wait." Her voice was soft, yet the entire room obeyed. She studied Lana for a long moment. The wildfire in her eyes, the trembling lips, the unpolished honesty that no one in this world of money and power ever dared to show. "What's your name, young lady?" Eleanor asked. Lana Miller," she whispered, mortified. Eleanor leaned back, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "Lana Miller," she repeated. "A woman who stands up for others, even when she's wrong. You don't see that often anymore." Gabriel frowned. "Mother—" "Be quiet," Eleanor cut him off. Her gaze never left Lana. "You've embarrassed my son," Eleanor said, her voice steady as a blade. "But somehow I'm not angry. Do you know why?" Lana blinked, trembling. "No, ma'am. Because for the first time," Eleanor continued, "I saw someone speak the truth, without fear, without calculation. This city is full of people who bow to power, who lie for advantage. But you shouted at power itself, believing you were defending someone else. That's rare." The room went still. Even the clinking of cups had stopped. Eleanor leaned back in her chair, eyes glinting with sharp amusement. "That's the kind of woman I want in this family." Lana frowned, confused. "Excuse me?" Eleanor's smile deepened. "You're going to marry my son." The words hit the air like thunder. "What?" Lana gasped. "You can't be serious." But Gabriel was already on his feet. "Mother, that's absurd," he said, his voice low but firm. "You can't just decide who I marry." "I can," she replied evenly. "When your reputation and this company's name are at stake." "Reputation?" Gabriel scoffed. "She screamed at me in public. That's not a marriage. That's a PR nightmare." Eleanor's gaze hardened. "And what do you think the headlines will say tomorrow, Costa Air humiliated a woman in front of a crowd? Or worse, CEO files lawsuit against a defenseless employee? Either way, you'll look like a bully, and she'll look like a victim. The board will eat you alive. Lana shook her head, panic rising. I never meant to. Eleanor raised a hand to silence her. I know, but perception doesn't care about intent. This, she gestured between them, can either destroy you both or save you both. She turned to Gabriel. Marry her, and the story changes. It becomes a misunderstanding that turned into destiny. The media will adore it. The company's image will soar. Then she turned back to Lana, her tone soft but sharp. And you, Miss Miller, will avoid a defamation lawsuit that could bury you for the next decade. Lana's throat went dry. You're blackmailing me? Eleanor smiled faintly. I prefer to call it a mutually beneficial arrangement. Gabriel stared at his mother, disbelief etched in every line of his face. You can't force this. Of course not, she said calmly. But I can advise you both on what's best. And right now, what's best is each other. The crowd, still frozen, exchanged whispers. Phones recorded, flashlights flickered. Lana wanted to scream, to run, but she couldn't move. The older woman's words pressed down like invisible chains. And somewhere in her gut, Lana knew Eleanor was right. In this world, appearances were power. And she had none. 24 hours later, under the sterile glow of Madison Avenue's courthouse lights, two signatures met on the same page. Lana Miller, the woman who yelled at the wrong millionaire. Gabriel Costa, the man whose mother had turned scandal into strategy. Neither smiled, neither spoke. But as the clerk stamped the paper and handed them their certificate, both felt the same sinking truth. This wasn't love. It was survival. And that was only the beginning. If you love modern emotional dramas, where pride meets fate and ordinary hearts crash into extraordinary worlds, make sure to subscribe and stay with us until the very end. This story will challenge everything you believe about love, truth, and the price of redemption. Sit back, relax, and enjoy today's story. They say some love stories begin with a spark. Lana Miller, a woman who'd barely recovered from the most humiliating mistake of her life, stood in front of a marble counter, clutching a pen like it might bite her. Across from her, in a tailored navy suit and eyes colder than glass, stood Gabriel Costa, the man she had accidentally screamed at in public. And now, legally, her soon-to-be husband. No music, no flowers, no vows. Just the scratching sound of a pen signing a document that neither of them believed in. 15 minutes, the clerk said flatly, stamping the papers. 15 minutes. That was all it took for two strangers to become husband and wife. A lawyer named James Whitmore served as witness. He was polite but clearly uncomfortable, as if even breathing too loudly might make the situation more absurd. Congratulations, he muttered, sliding the papers toward them. Lana's voice was barely a whisper. This is insane. Gabriel didn't respond. He simply buttoned his jacket, nodded to James, and said, Let's go. The ride to his penthouse was silent. New York buzzed outside the tinted windows, but inside the car, there was only tension. Sharp, fragile, like glass about to crack. Lana kept glancing at her reflection in the window. What have I done, she thought. She didn't love this man. She barely knew him. But after that explosive incident at the cafe and the threat of a lawsuit that could have destroyed her career, she'd had no choice but to accept this proposal. When the elevator doors opened at the top floor, Lana gasped. The apartment was breathtaking. On high ceilings, a wall of glass revealing the skyline. Minimalist furniture that probably cost more than her entire yearly salary. But it didn't feel like home. It felt curated, too perfect, too empty. Gabriel gestured toward the hallway. Your room's on the left, mine's down the hall. We'll keep things simple. Simple, she repeated, crossing her arms. You mean pretending we don't exist to each other? He turned, his expression unreadable. I mean not complicating an arrangement that's already complicated enough. Lana bit her lip, fighting the urge to snap back. But something in his tone, that quiet exhaustion, stopped her. He wasn't cruel, just distant. A man used to being obeyed, not understood. The first few days were chaos wrapped in politeness. She tried to make coffee. The machine cost $15,000 and had more buttons than a spaceship. She burned the first batch. Gabriel walked in, sniffed the air, and said dryly, "Congratulations. You've just ruined a machine worth half a car." She rolled her eyes. "Maybe you should label the buttons next time. I thought that one was start, not self-destruct." He smirked, just a little. It was the first time she'd seen him almost human. Then came the war of personal space. Her cozy mess clashed with his obsession for order. When she moved her makeup kit into the shared bathroom, he replaced it neatly on her desk the next morning. With a sticky note, "Please respect the system." She replied with another note, "Please respect gravity," and dropped his perfectly folded tie into the laundry basket. Somehow, between the quiet battles and accidental laughs, the air between them softened. Not quite affection, but curiosity. What Lana didn't know was that far away, in her glass office overlooking the Hudson, Eleanor Costa, Gabriel's mother, was watching. She had orchestrated the entire marriage with a motive deeper than pride or punishment. To her, Lana wasn't just the girl who had yelled at her son, she was the spark her son had long lost. That afternoon, Eleanor signed a confidential document, sliding it across to the family's legal advisor. Transfer of ownership, 20% of Costa Tech Holdings, to Mrs. Lana Costa. James, the lawyer who had witnessed the wedding, hesitated. "Madam, that's a substantial amount of power." Eleanor smiled faintly. "Exactly. Let's see what she does with it." Meanwhile, in the penthouse, Lana was learning what life beside power really looked like. She woke up one night to find the office lights still on. Gabriel sat by his desk, tie loosened, eyes fixed on a report full of red numbers. The mighty CEO looked tired, human. "You work like the world will end if you stop," she said softly. Without looking up, he replied, "Maybe it will." Lana walked over, her voice gentler. "You ever thought maybe it's already ended? You just haven't noticed yet." That made him look at her. For the first time, his gaze wasn't distant. It was searching, like he was seeing her beyond the mistake, beyond the contract. He said nothing more, but the silence that followed wasn't cold anymore. It was alive. The next morning, Gabriel left early for a meeting. Lana wandered into the kitchen and found a note on the counter. His handwriting this time. "If you touch the espresso machine again, at least read the manual. Page 4, lower right corner." She laughed out loud. A real laugh, the first since all this began. Maybe this marriage wasn't built on love. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, it was built on something rarer. Honesty. Far away, Eleanor watched the city skyline through her window and whispered to herself, "Let's see which one of them learns faster. The man who controls everything, or the woman who refuses to be controlled?" Sometimes walking into work feels like stepping into a war zone. For Lana Costa, that Monday morning was exactly that. It had been 2 weeks since the 15-minute marriage. She was still adjusting to her strange new life. A husband who treated her like a polite stranger, a penthouse that didn't feel like home, and a mother-in-law who had just made her part owner of an empire without telling her why. So when Lana decided to go back to work at the Meridian Grand Hotel, she thought it might be a place to breathe again, somewhere normal. But destiny had other plans. The moment she stepped into the marble-lined lobby, heels clicking across the polished floor, she froze. Behind the reception desk stood a woman she hadn't seen since college. Madeline Winters. Perfect hair, perfect smile, and the same venomous eyes. Back in university, Madeline had been Lana's biggest rival. The kind of person who played fair only when people were watching. And now, she was the general manager of the hotel, which meant Lana had just walked straight into her command. Madeline's red lips curved into a smirk. Well, Mrs. Costa, didn't expect to see you here. Working." Lana kept her voice calm. "Good morning, Miss Winters. I'm here to do my job. Same as always." "Oh, of course," Madeline purred. "Just try not to bring any of your personal scandals into the lobby. This is a 5-star establishment." The words cut, but Lana didn't flinch. If there was one thing her marriage had already taught her, it was how to hold her chin up when people wanted to see her break. By noon, the hotel buzzed with preparations for a high-profile investor event, a gathering that could decide the future of the Meridian's management contract. Madeline, as expected, delegated every impossible task to Lana. Then, as if the day couldn't get worse, a familiar voice echoed behind her. "Lana?" She turned, and her heart dropped. It was Matthew Carter, the man who had once broken her best friend's heart, and the very reason she'd yelled at the wrong millionaire that fateful day. Except now, he was wearing an expensive suit and a smug smile. "I didn't know you worked here," he said smoothly. "I'm the new financial consultant for the Meridian. Temporary, of course. Madeline and I go way back." The way he said Madeline told Lana everything she needed to know. 2 snakes, 1 nest. Over the next few days, the atmosphere thickened with quiet sabotage. Emails accidentally deleted, reports shuffled, instructions changed. The breaking point came on the morning of the investor brunch. The event Lana had been organizing for weeks. Madeline had set the official start time at 6 a.m., sharp. Lana confirmed every detail the night before, but when she arrived at 6 on the dot, the lobby was already full. Cameras flashing, investors whispering. The event had started at 5:30. Lana's stomach twisted. Her name was already being whispered among the staff. "She's late. She messed up." Madeline floated by, feigning concern. "Oh dear, didn't you get the memo? We changed the time. I emailed you last night." Lana's blood ran cold. She checked her inbox, and there it was, a forwarded message, time-stamped 11:58 p.m. She hadn't even seen it. It was deliberate, a setup. But if Madeline thought she could humiliate her, she didn't know who she was dealing with. Lana took a breath, squared her shoulders, and stepped forward. "Good morning, everyone," she said clearly, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "Please allow me to begin by thanking you for being early. Meridian prides itself on efficiency, and today, you've proven why this hotel leads the city in hospitality." A pause, a few chuckles. The tension softened. Lana smiled, moving smoothly into her presentation, improvising every line with confidence and grace. She guided the guests through the hotel's upcoming projects, the sustainability plan, the partnerships she had built. Every number, every name, right from memory. By the time she finished, the investors were nodding, even clapping. Madeline's face had gone pale. Matthew leaned over and whispered something to her, but she didn't reply. Lana had just turned their trap into applause. Later that afternoon, in the privacy of her office, Lana's hands finally trembled. She'd survived, barely, but the rumor had already started spreading. The new Mrs. Costa almost ruined the investor meeting. Still, she refused to break. She knew who she was. She wasn't just a name on a marriage certificate. She was the woman who could turn chaos into order, even when the odds were stacked against her. That evening, back at the penthouse, the city lights spilled through the glass walls. Lana dropped her bag onto the couch, kicked off her heels, and let out a long, shaky sigh. She forced a tired laugh. "I think this qualifies as one of the worst days of my life." Gabriel looked up from the desk, his expression unreadable for a moment. Then he asked quietly, "How bad was it?" Lana gave a small, exhausted smile. "Bad, but not enough to make me quit." A faint smirk touched his lips, half admiration, half surprise. "Good," he said softly, "because you're going to need that fire." He looked at her for a long moment, then said, "You know, most people in your position would have walked out after what they pulled." She met his gaze. "I'm not most people." Something flickered in his expression. Respect, maybe even pride. "Good," he said softly, "because you're about to need that attitude." He didn't explain, but somewhere in the shadows of the Costa Empire, plans were already moving, and Lana was at the center of them, whether she knew it or not. That night, as the city lights shimmered beyond the penthouse glass, Lana lay awake thinking of the day's battles. Madeline, Matthew, the whispers, the traps. It wasn't just work anymore. It was survival. And in this world of polished lies and silent wars, one thing was becoming very clear. The battlefield wasn't only at the office, it was everywhere. The morning after the investor event, the air inside the Meridian Grand Hotel was thick with tension. Everyone had heard the rumors. The new Lana messed up the schedule. The investors were furious. The general manager might fire her today. And that's exactly what Madeline Winters intended to do. Lana, still adjusting to the surreal life of being the billionaire's wife, walked into the office with her head held high, even though her stomach twisted with anxiety. Madeline was already waiting. She sat behind her mahogany desk like a queen in her throne, red nails tapping against her report. "Well, look who decided to show up," Madeline said, her tone dripping with false sweetness. "After yesterday's performance, I wasn't sure you'd have the courage." Lana closed the door quietly. "If you're referring to the investor brunch, it went well. The guests were satisfied, and the board will receive their report today." Madeline's smile sharpened. "Oh, don't flatter yourself. You embarrassed this hotel by showing up late and improvising like a circus act. I have a stack of complaints already." "That's impossible," Lana replied calmly. "The investors thanked me personally. You can check the feedback." Madeline slammed the folder shut. "Enough. I decide what counts as professional here, not you. And as of this morning, you're suspended pending review." Lana froze. "Suspended?" "Oh, don't look so shocked," Madeline continued, leaning back with satisfaction. "You thought marrying into power made you untouchable? Not in my hotel." Lana's pulse raced, but she refused to break. "If that's your decision, I'll wait for the board's response." Madeline smirked. "Sweetheart, I am the board here." She pressed the intercom button. "Security, please escort Mrs. Lana out." The office door swung open before the sentence finished. A woman entered, tall, graceful, dressed in an ivory suit that seemed to silence the room by itself. Every employee nearby straightened instinctively. Madeline's voice faltered. Mrs. Costa?" Eleanor gave a polite nod. "Good morning, Miss Winters." "Good morning, Lana." Lana blinked in shock. "You're—" "Yes," Eleanor interrupted softly. "I am the owner of this hotel and the chairwoman of Costa Group." The words hit like thunder. Every head outside the glass door turned. Eleanor walked in, slow and deliberate, her heels clicking on the marble floor like a metronome of authority. "I came," she said, "because I've received conflicting reports about yesterday's event. One claims disaster. The other," she looked at Lana, "calls it a success." Madeline straightened her back. "Mrs. Costa, I assure you my version is accurate. This woman jeopardized our reputation. I was preparing disciplinary action." "Were you?" Eleanor asked coolly. "Tell me, Ms. Winters, how exactly did she jeopardize the brand when every investor who attended personally emailed me this morning, praising her professionalism and her courage under pressure?" Madeline's jaw tensed. "That can't be—" "Oh, it is," Eleanor said evenly. "Would you like me to read them aloud?" Silence. Eleanor turned to Lana. "You handled yourself admirably. Quick thinking under fire is rare. It's a quality I value." Then her gaze shifted to the corner of the room, where a man had been standing quietly this whole time, pretending to be invisible. Matthew Carter, the financial consultant. "Mr. Carter," Eleanor said, "perhaps you can explain why the event's calendar logs show the time adjustment came from your account." Matthew froze. It was just a mix-up, a technical—" Eleanor cut him off. "A mix-up that conveniently made Mrs. Costa appear incompetent in front of our investors?" Sweat beaded at his temple. I only did what Ms. Winters instructed." "Enough." Eleanor's tone was sharp but calm, the kind of calm that made people tremble. "I don't tolerate deceit in my company. You're dismissed, effective immediately." Matthew's mouth fell open. "You can't—" "Security will escort you," she added simply, already turning away. Two guards stepped in. The door shut behind him. The silence that followed was suffocating. Eleanor looked back at Madeleine. "As for you, Ms. Winters," she said, her voice now softer, but still dangerous, "I built this hotel from the ground up. I know how to recognize talent and how to recognize when pride clouds judgment." Madeleine's throat tightened. "Mrs. Costa, "Save it," Eleanor interrupted. "I won't fire you, not yet. You're competent but reckless. You'll remain as general manager under supervision. Under supervision, Madeline repeated, disbelief creeping into her tone. Eleanor turned to Lana, her eyes warm now. Mrs. Costa will assume the position of Vice President of Hotel Operations for the Meridian Group. She will oversee your work and report directly to me. The air went still. Madeline's expression cracked. You can't be serious. Oh, I'm very serious, Eleanor replied. You wanted to test her. Now she'll be testing you. Lana stood frozen, stunned. Vice President? I don't think I'm qualified. Eleanor smiled faintly. You're more qualified than you realize. Leadership isn't a title, dear. It's instinct. And yesterday, you proved you have it. She stepped closer, lowering her voice so only Lana could hear. Don't let them intimidate you. They'll expect you to fail. Let them, then surprise them. Lana swallowed hard. I'll do my best. Don't do your best, Eleanor said. Do what's necessary. Then she turned toward the door. Ms. Winters, I expect full cooperation. And please, no more creative scheduling. Madeline's face flushed crimson. Yes, Mrs. Costa. Eleanor paused before leaving. Good, because if I have to return here again, it won't be for a meeting. The door closed. Outside, whispers filled the lobby. Staff stared as Lana walked out. The woman who, just yesterday, they thought was finished. But today, she walked taller. Power had shifted, not by force, not by manipulation, but by truth. That evening, when she returned to the penthouse, Gabriel was waiting by the window. He didn't turn around when he spoke. So, Vice President? Lana blinked. You heard already? He chuckled softly. It's my family's company. News travels faster than coffee. She sighed, half laughing, half exhausted. Your mother nearly gave me a heart attack. She gives everyone one, Gabriel said. Then his tone softened. But she doesn't hand out power lightly. If she gave it to you, it's because she sees something. Lana looked at him, unsure what to say. And you, what do you see? He finally met her eyes. Someone who doesn't back down. She smiled faintly. You have no idea. And for the first time, the cold air between them felt different. The war was no longer about pride. It was about respect. And beneath that, something new was quietly growing. Real leadership isn't measured when the cameras are flashing. It's measured in quiet hallways, behind service doors, when the easy choice is to blame, and the right choice is to listen. It had been 3 intense weeks since Lana Costa was elevated to Vice President of Hotel Operations. After yesterday's public power shift, eyes followed her everywhere inside the Meridian Grand. Every greeting felt like a test, every whisper, a verdict. And then, on the afternoon of the Costa Foundation Gala, the most visible event of the season, trouble surfaced. Lana was walking her final checks in the ballroom, taking in the crisp linens, the subtle uplighting, the string quartet doing sound checks, when she felt it, the static energy of a staff crisis. 2 security agents stood at the service corridor, murmuring with Nathan Cole, the hotel's operations manager, a man with immaculate spreadsheets and a chronic lack of curiosity. What's happening? Lana asked, voice even. Nathan straightened, smoothing his tie. A minor discrepancy, Mrs. Costa. We'll handle it. I asked what's happening, she repeated. Nathan exchanged a look with the guards, then sighed. 6 bottles of Grand Cuvée from the climate cellar are missing, the ones consigned for tonight's charity auction. His mouth tightened. Estimated value, 15 to 18,000. Where did they go? Lana pressed. We've already identified the culprit, he said, almost relieved to deliver a conclusion. Ava Ruiz, new server. We found the bottles in a storage crate near her locker. Ms. Winters and I are preparing termination. Lana's eyes narrowed. You found bottles near her locker. Did you see her move them? Do you have footage? Before Nathan could answer, Madeline Winters appeared, posture razor straight. We can't babysit every hallway. The cameras on that level were under maintenance. The wine is missing. The bottles were found by her locker. We're done here. We're done when we have facts, Lana replied. Madeline's smile was cold. Facts are exactly what we have. Then let me see them, Lana said, stepping past. They brought Ava into the small staff lounge. She looked barely 22, hands locked together so tightly her knuckles blanched, eyes red but defiant. "I didn't touch those bottles," she said, voice shaking yet steady. "I know the rules. I scanned into the ballroom, did my setup, ran back to catering. That's it. I've never even been inside the cellar." Madeline folded her arms. "And yet the wine appears next to your locker. How curious." Ava swallowed. "People leave crates in that hall all the time. I didn't put them there." Lana held her gaze. "Did you scan your badge anywhere else today?" "No, ma'am." Lana turned to Nathan. "Pull every digital door log from 5 a.m. to noon. Cellar access, service elevator, that corridor. Now." Nathan hesitated. "We're on a tight timeline." "Then move quickly," Lana said, voice still calm but iron underneath. "If we fire the wrong person today, we don't get to fix it tomorrow." Madeline exhaled sharply. "This is performative. You're grandstanding before the gala." "No," Lana said. "I'm protecting this brand. And our people." 28 minutes later, Lana sat in her office with the security dashboard open. One thing about the Meridian, the building knew the truth even when people didn't. Every badge swipe, every door push, all recorded. Ava's card showed ballroom setup, catering access, nothing unusual. But at 6:17 a.m., the Climate Cellar door had opened twice. The badge? Deshaun Price. Deshaun had been on the janitorial team for years. The kind of steady presence people stop noticing because he never makes noise. He was on the overnight rotation, usually invisible by sunrise. Lana buzzed her assistant. "Bring Deshaun to me, and do not..." She glanced toward the glass wall where Madeline paced. "Do not inform Ms. Winters yet." When Deshaun arrived, he stood just inside the door, cap in hand, every line of his posture saying, "I don't belong in rooms like this." "Mr. Price," Lana said gently, "thank you for coming." "Please sit." He shook his head. "I'm okay standing, ma'am." She slid the printouts across the desk. "Your badge accessed the cellar at 6:17 a.m. Twice. Can you tell me why?" For a moment, he stared at the paper as if it were a sentence. Then his shoulders sagged. "My wife's been sick," he said quietly. "Insurance lapsed when she had to quit her shift. I've been behind." His voice thinned. "I didn't plan to steal. I was going to sell 2 bottles, put the rest back by end of week. I hid them in a janitor's crate so the porters wouldn't see. I am sorry, that's not who I am." Lana listened. No theatrics, no pity masquerading as morality, just attention. "Why didn't you ask for help?" He gave a small, painful smile. "Men like me don't ask. We mop. We keep moving." She nodded slowly. "Thank you for telling me the truth." 15 minutes before the gala briefing, the conference room filled. Department heads, finance, PR. And at the back, the chairwoman herself, Eleanor Costa, observing without announcing. Madeline stood ready with a written termination for Ava and a carefully curated narrative. "Before we begin," Lana said, stepping to the head of the table, "we have to correct something." Madeline stiffened. "We're not doing this now." "We are," Lana replied, "because this," she tapped the folder, "is what defines who we are." She laid out the door logs. The cellar was accessed by Deshaun Price at 6:17 a.m. He moved the bottles to a maintenance crate near the staff lockers. Ava Ruiz never accessed the cellar. She was falsely accused. A murmur rippled. Nathan looked like he wanted to evaporate. Madeline snapped, "So now you're defending theft?" "I'm correcting sloppy leadership," Lana said evenly. "We almost destroyed a young woman's career with zero evidence. That failure is on us." She turned the page. "Here's how we proceed. Ava Ruiz is cleared and will be promoted to shift supervisor. Banquets effective tonight. She demonstrated composure under suspicion and has strong guest reviews." Ava, standing by the door with HR, covered her mouth. Tears welled. "As for Deshaun Price," Lana continued, "he keeps his job, but he will be reassigned to night inventory and compliance with a mentor and 2 signature controls. Costa Group will cover his wife's medication through the Foundation's hardship program. This is not a pardon, it's a structure for accountability and a lifeline." Nathan finally spoke, voice small. "I should have checked the logs first. Yes, Lana said. You should have. You'll submit a corrective plan for incident verification within 72 hours. The room quieted. At the far end, Eleanor stood. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Ladies and gentlemen, she said, that is called leadership. Justice with a spine, compassion with rules. Her eyes rested on Lana, proud but measured. It's the difference between guarding a building and building a culture. Eleanor turned to her legal aid. Amend the executive incentive schedule. Effective immediately, increase Mrs. Costa's equity in Costa Group by 5%. Consider it compensation for value created. Reputational and operational. Lana blinked. Eleanor, that's appropriate, Eleanor finished, a tiny smile in her eyes. Rarity must be rewarded. Madeline stared at the table, fury masked as silence. Nathan scribbled notes like a student retaking a class. And around the room you could feel it. Alignment. Not fear, not hype. Alignment. Hours later, after the gala's final toast, Lana stepped onto the balcony. New York glittered. 1,000 windows, 1,000 stories. Footsteps approached. Gabriel handed her a glass. To not firing the wrong person, he said, a wry curve at his mouth. She laughed softly. To learning before judging. He studied her. You know, people usually pick one, hard or kind. You keep choosing both. Maybe that's the only way it works, she replied. Kindness without structure is chaos. Structure without kindness is cruelty. He considered that, eyes thoughtful. My mother gave you equity today. She gave me responsibility, Lana said. The equity just makes it heavier. They clinked glasses. Below, the city pulsed. Somewhere inside, Ava was calling her mother with the good news. Somewhere else, Deshawn was heading home with a plan. Not a secret, and for the first time since her life had been rewritten by a courthouse stamp. Lana felt the weight of power, not as a crown, but as a promise. High above Manhattan, the Costa Tower shimmered like a blade of glass cutting through the clouds. 40 floors of ambition, strategy, and secrets. And on this particular morning, that tower would become a battlefield. It had been a month since Lana Costa had taken the reins at the Meridian Grand. Under her leadership, the hotel's numbers had improved, morale had stabilized, and for the first time in years, guests were writing personal thank you notes instead of complaints. But while the staff admired her, the board did not. Not all of them. Because in the world of corporate dynasties, merit rarely mattered as much as perception. And someone, somewhere, wanted to ruin hers. The elevator doors opened to the executive floor. Black marble, silent corridors, and the scent of power. Lana adjusted her blazer, clutching her data tablet. She had been invited to a quarterly investment review, her first at the top. When she entered the boardroom, she immediately noticed the chill. The long glass table gleamed under the city light. 12 executives were already seated, whispering behind crisp folders. At the head of the table sat Cliff Donovan, Costa Group's chief financial officer, a man whose smile never reached his eyes. Mrs. Costa, he said smoothly, glad you could join us. We were just reviewing your property's latest report. The screens flickered to life. Charts, numbers, red arrows. The words Meridian Grand, decline in performance, glowed across the display. Lana frowned. That can't be right. Cliff tapped a pen against his tablet. Revenue down 12%. Guest satisfaction plummeted from 92 to 68. Operational costs up 22%. These figures come from an external audit. Around the room, murmurs began. She was inexperienced. Nepotism hire. His wife, of course. The words slid under Lana's skin like ice. She took a slow breath, forcing calm. Where did this data come from? She asked. A third-party consulting firm, Cliff replied, requested by our partners after certain internal concerns. Internal concerns, she repeated, meaning someone from inside Costa Group submitted it. Cliff only smiled. We take initiative seriously here. The meaning was clear. Someone had set her up. Again. For a moment, she stood silent. The old Lana, the one who once avoided confrontation, might have folded, but this Lana had seen too much. Learned too much to bow her head now. She opened her tablet, connecting to the live network of the Meridian Grand. The screen projected onto the central monitor, replacing the doctored graphs with real-time data. If we're discussing facts, she said evenly, let's use the correct ones. A hush fell over the room. Current guest satisfaction, 93%, verified through third-party survey API. Revenue is up 7% quarter to date. The 22% rise in operational cost reflects an ongoing renovation of our wellness floor, approved by this board in June. She scrolled through graphs, each line rising where the report had claimed decline. These aren't numbers from Meridian, she said, her tone gaining weight. These are fabrications. Someone has tampered with internal files. Cliff's smile vanished. That's a serious accusation. And a serious crime, Lana replied. The silence thickened. Then she tapped one final command, and a file opened. Metadata. IP traces. The origin of the falsified report. The name appeared in red across the screen. Madeline Winters. Gas filled the room. Madeline, seated 3 chairs down, went pale. That's impossible, she said, but her voice trembled. The audit logs say otherwise, Lana continued. You commissioned the report under an alias, routed it through an external vendor, and attached my signature to the approval form. Cliff turned to her in shock. You, Madeline stammered. I was protecting the company. No, Lana said, eyes steady. You were protecting your pride. You couldn't stand that someone you once dismissed was now above you. Madeline's lips moved, but no words came out. Lana stepped back, her voice lowering. You could have destroyed hundreds of jobs. For what? Ego? For a long moment, the only sound was the low hum of the city beyond the windows. Then, from the far end of the table, a chair moved. A familiar voice spoke, calm, controlled, but with authority that made everyone stop breathing. That's enough. Lana turned, and her heart stopped. Gabriel. She hadn't expected him to be here. He was supposed to be traveling, managing a partner project abroad. But here he was, walking to the head of the table, his ID badge catching the light. President, Costa Tech Holdings. Every executive stood at once. Gabriel glanced at the forged report, then at Madeline. I've reviewed this data myself. It's fraudulent. The investigation into your misconduct begins today. Madeline's eyes widened. You can't do that. He cut her off with a single look. I can. I'm your direct superior. Then his tone softened slightly, turning to the board. Let me make something clear. Costa Group doesn't punish initiative, but it does punish deceit, and anyone who undermines this company's integrity or its people will find no place here. He turned to Lana. For the first time, she saw him not as the quiet, distant husband she'd been forced to marry, but as the man who commanded an empire. You've handled yourself with more composure and truth than most people in this room, he said quietly. You've earned respect, and you have mine. Lana could only stare. He'd hidden this. All of it. The meetings, the decisions, the influence. He wasn't just part of the company, he was the company. The realization hit her like a wave. The man she'd married by accident was the one running the entire empire she'd been trying to survive. After the meeting, the board filed out in uneasy silence. Only Gabriel and Lana remained, standing by the massive window that looked down on the city. So this is what you do, she said softly. You're the president. He gave a faint smile. You didn't ask. I didn't think I had the right. He turned toward her. You've always had the right, Lana. You just never realized it. She looked out at the skyline, the city that had once felt impossible. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted to see how you'd act when you thought you had nothing, he said. Now I've seen it, and so has everyone else. For the first time, his tone wasn't guarded. It was proud, human. Down below, the Costa Tower glimmered in the afternoon sun, a monument built on ambition, now ruled by something rarer, integrity. Lana had walked into that boardroom as the accused. She left it as a force. And as for Gabriel, the man she once thought was just another cold millionaire, she now saw him differently. Not as the one holding the power, but as the one finally learning how to share it. Some stories don't begin with fireworks. They begin quietly, with two people who've spent too long pretending not to care. After the boardroom storm at Costa Tower, Lana Costa found herself standing on a strange edge between pride and confusion. She had faced powerful men, defended her work, exposed lies, and walked out victorious. Yet when the adrenaline faded, what lingered wasn't triumph. It was him, Gabriel Costa, her husband on paper, her mystery in real life. Since that day, their silence had changed. It wasn't cold anymore. It was uncertain, like the air before spring. And then one evening, he did something he'd never done before. He asked her out. Not as the president of Costa Tech, not as a man trying to manage damage control. Just Gabriel. He told her to pick the place, and she did. No glittering rooftop, no exclusive reservation, just a small Italian restaurant tucked between two bookstores in the West Village, a place she discovered years ago when her world was much smaller. The kind of place where the owner still greeted guests by name and the candlelight flickered like it was alive. When Gabriel arrived, he looked out of place in that world of laughter and warmth. Expensive suit, guarded posture. But for once, he wasn't trying to control the room. He looked nervous, human, and maybe that's why Lana's chest ached a little. The owner recognized her instantly and, before she could protest, brought their special couples dinner, a gesture of affection that made Gabriel blink in surprise. He'd never been treated like that before. Not as a CEO, but as a man someone thought might be in love. He tried to help with the menu, but it was clear he didn't know what to do. He poured the wrong wine with the wrong dish, spilled a few drops on his cuff, and when the waiter placed a tiny dessert candle on their tiramisu, Gabriel actually looked like he wanted to disappear. Lana laughed, not mockingly, but softly, the kind of laugh that breaks years of ice. He looked at her then, really looked. The woman who had once yelled at him in a cafe was now smiling across the table, her eyes gentler, her walls lower. And for the first time, he smiled too. After dinner, they walked through the quiet streets of the village. New York looked different that night, slower, kinder, washed in amber light. The city that once judged them now seemed to hold its breath as they passed. Neither of them spoke much. They didn't have to. There was something healing about the silence, the kind that didn't demand words, only presence. When they reached Washington Square, the sound of the fountain filled the night. The same fountain where countless strangers had made wishes and left behind echoes of laughter. Gabriel stopped, hands in his pockets, watching the water rise and fall. For a moment, Lana saw him not as a man born into privilege, but as someone who'd carried too much weight for too long, the kind of man who'd forgotten how to exhale. And in that moment, something inside her shifted. The anger, the pride, the distance, all of it melted into something softer, something dangerous. Because love, when it sneaks in, never announces itself. It just happens. They stood there for a long time, surrounded by the hum of the city. Then Gabriel took a step closer. Not enough to touch, but enough that she could feel the warmth of him against the cold air. He didn't say anything grand or rehearsed. He didn't need to. The look in his eyes was enough. That quiet, almost fearful question of whether it was finally safe to care. Lana didn't answer with words. She closed the distance between them, and the world went still. The fountain sparkled under the city lights, and their first kiss, unplanned, unsure, honest, felt like both an ending and a beginning. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't cinematic. It was real. And real was exactly what they both needed. Later that night, they took a cab home. The ride was silent, their hands brushing now and then, testing the electricity that neither dared to name. When they stepped into the penthouse, something was different. The air no longer carried the cold professionalism that once defined the space. It felt alive. The once divided home, 2 rooms, 2 lives, suddenly felt too small for all the unspoken things between them. Gabriel set his jacket on the couch and hesitated. Lana turned toward her room, but stopped when she heard his voice. Quiet, careful. Stay. She didn't turn immediately. She didn't need to. because for the first time, the word didn't sound like a command. It sounded like a request. That night, they didn't talk about the past or the company or their strange beginnings. They simply allowed themselves to be human. Two people who had fought too hard for everything else and finally decided to stop fighting the one thing that mattered. Morning came softly, sunlight spilled across the skyline, turning the city gold. Lana woke to the sound of Gabriel making coffee, badly judging by the smell. She smiled to herself. Once this apartment had felt like a cage, now it felt like possibility. And maybe that's what love really was. Not fireworks, not perfection, but the quiet moment when two people decide to stop surviving separately and start living together. That day, as Gabriel left for the office, he paused at the door. There was something lighter in his face now, a trace of warmth that hadn't been there before. "Dinner again next week?" he asked. Lana grinned. "Only if I picked the place." He nodded. "Deal." And as the elevator doors closed behind him, Lana realized that for the first time since all of this began, from the chaotic cafe to the courthouse, from tension to truth, she wasn't living in someone else's story anymore. She was writing her own. Love doesn't just change two people. Sometimes it mends an entire family. For Lana Costa, that truth came quietly, on a Sunday morning filled with sunlight and nerves. It had been months since her whirlwind marriage turned into something real. The quiet tension between her and Gabriel had softened into companionship, respect, and something deeper that neither dared to name too loudly. But this morning, she wasn't the executive vice president of Costa Group. She wasn't the woman who exposed corruption or negotiated contracts worth millions. Today, she was simply Lana Miller, the daughter who hadn't been home in nearly 2 years. The visit had been arranged weeks earlier, her parents and younger sister Rachel coming to New York to see how she was doing. It sounded simple enough on the phone, but Lana knew what it meant. Her parents had never approved of her marriage, especially after the scandal that started it. They thought she'd sold herself into a life of luxury, or worse, submission. And maybe that's why she'd avoided coming home for so long. Pride was a stubborn thing, and forgiveness was even harder. When the elevator opened to the penthouse, her mother's breath caught. The place looked like something from a magazine. Glass, gold, skyline views. Her father, ever the quiet craftsman, said little, just ran his hand along the marble counter and murmured, "You really live here?" Lana smiled softly. "Yes, Dad, but it's not as glamorous as it looks." Rachel, bright-eyed and mischievous as ever, leaned on the railing, staring out at the city. "It's insane, Lana. You can see the whole world from here." Lana didn't answer. She was watching her parents exchange glances, half pride, half uncertainty, because no matter how successful she appeared, she was still their daughter. The one who once helped in their small antique store on weekends, dusting old lamps and fixing typewriters with her dad. Later that afternoon, Gabriel came home. He didn't arrive like a CEO. No entourage, no phone calls, just a man carrying a bag of groceries. He greeted her family politely, setting the bag on the counter. There was a brief silence, the kind that sits heavy between two worlds that don't quite understand each other yet. Then something shifted. Her mother offered him tea. Rachel asked about the view. Even her father, hesitant at first, began asking questions about woodworking and restoration. And Gabriel, the man who once seemed made of stone, listened. Really listened. It wasn't the conversation that changed things. It was the kindness in it, the quiet respect, the way he looked at Lana's father when he spoke about the store. Not as a man of money, but as a man of craft. That night over dinner, the story came out. Her father explained how their small antique store, Miller's Heritage, had begun to grow online after Lana helped them set up a digital catalog years ago. Orders were coming in from collectors across the country, but expansion needed funding, and the local bank had turned them down. Lana's mother sighed, trying to hide her worry. "We'll manage. We always do." But Gabriel didn't let the moment slip. He listened quietly the way he did when analyzing a merger. Except this time, his tone was softer when he finally spoke. He told them the store didn't just have sentimental value. It had potential. A timeless niche that could thrive with the right systems, logistics, and reach. Then he made an offer, calm, fair, and structured. A $200,000 investment for 30% of the business, a 6-month trial period, and full technical support from Costa Group's innovation team to help digitize the operation. If after 6 months the family wanted to buy back the shares, they could. No penalties, no strings. It wasn't charity, it was partnership. Her father was silent for a long time, turning the numbers over in his head. He wasn't used to being offered deals by men in tailored suits. But something in Gabriel's tone, the lack of condescension, the clear respect, made him trust it. Her mother wiped her eyes. Rachel clapped her hands in excitement. And for the first time in years, Lana saw her family and her husband belonging to the same room. After dinner, when the others had gone to rest, Lana stepped out onto the balcony, the skyline glowing below. Gabriel joined her, hands in his pockets, eyes on the horizon. She wanted to thank him, but he shook his head lightly. "You don't need to. I didn't do it for you." "I know," she said quietly. "You did it because you saw something worth saving." He nodded once. "I saw you." The words lingered longer than they should have, because beneath them wasn't just affection, it was understanding. The kind that only comes when two people stop seeing what divides them and start seeing what they can build together. By the time her family left 2 days later, the tension had dissolved into warmth. Her father hugged Gabriel, awkwardly, but genuinely. Her mother slipped Alana a note that simply read, "He's not what we thought. Take care of each other." And Rachel, ever the bold one, whispered, "You two actually look happy. Weird, but kind of beautiful." As the elevator doors closed, Lana stood there for a moment, tears threatening but never falling. She'd spent so long fighting to prove her worth, to her family, to the world, to herself. But maybe worth wasn't something you fought for. Maybe it was something you built, piece by piece, through kindness, patience, and love that didn't need to be loud to be real. That night she returned to the balcony. The city stretched endlessly below, 1,000 lights flickering like promises. And for the first time since it all began, from the chaos of a mistaken accusation to the quiet grace of this moment, Lana felt complete. Two worlds had finally met, and instead of colliding, they had learned how to coexist. Sometimes the biggest changes in life don't come with thunder or applause. They come quietly, in a moment so small, so ordinary, that you don't realize your world has just shifted forever. For Lana Costa, that moment arrived on a gray morning, soft with rain. The city outside her window still pulsed with its usual rhythm. Horns, sirens, the sound of a million lives chasing something. But inside the penthouse, time felt still. The test lay on the bathroom counter, its tiny blue lines forming a truth that took her breath away. 2 lines, 2 lives. One future she hadn't planned for, but couldn't stop smiling at. She sat down, trying to breathe. The woman who once built her life around control, numbers, deadlines, structure, now found herself trembling over a miracle she hadn't dared to dream of. When Gabriel came home that evening, drenched from a meeting, she didn't know how to say it, so she didn't. She simply handed him the test, her hands shaking, her lips silent. He looked down, confused at first, then still, and for the first time since she'd known him, his composure shattered completely. The man who could negotiate billion-dollar deals without blinking suddenly laughed and cried all at once, pulling her into his arms. In that moment, the world outside didn't exist. It was just them. 2 people who had met by accident, hurt each other, fought, forgiven, and somehow built something real. Now that something had a heartbeat. The weeks that followed were different. Lana's mornings began slower. The once restless energy of a corporate warrior had been replaced by something gentler, quieter, a kind of peace she hadn't known she needed. Gabriel, once defined by control, found himself learning tenderness. He would catch himself watching her work in the living room, hand on her small growing bump, and feel something unfamiliar. Not pride, not power, but awe. Even his mother, Eleanor Costa, whose approval came rarely and in measured doses, softened. She sent handmade herbal teas, called every few days to check on appointments, and for once didn't sound like the chairwoman of an empire. but like a grandmother in the making. But peace, as always, attracts envy. It began subtly, a mention in the society pages, whispers in the upper floors of Costa Tower. The name Melissa Hawthorne began to surface, a familiar one in the city's elite circles. Melissa was the kind of woman who lived in headlines. Daughter of a steel tycoon, educated at Oxford, more accustomed to power than sincerity. Years ago, her family had attempted to merge fortunes with the Costas, but Gabriel had declined. Now rumor had it she was back, and this time she wasn't playing nice. She appeared at charity events, luncheons, investor gatherings, always near, always smiling too easily, speaking too sweetly. To the press, she called it networking. To the world, it looked like pursuit. And to Lana, it felt like a shadow creeping at the edge of her newfound joy. One evening, the gossip columns went further. A photograph surfaced. Melissa leaning a little too close to Gabriel at a business gala, whispering something behind her champagne glass. The caption was cruel: "The future of Costa Tech, or a marriage of convenience?" Lana didn't say anything. She didn't cry. She'd learned long ago that silence could be stronger than words. But that night, she ate dinner alone. What Melissa didn't know was that the Costas were not a family easily manipulated. When the rumors reached Eleanor, she didn't summon PR teams or lawyers. She called her son. And what followed wasn't a lecture. It was legacy. Eleanor reminded him that reputations, like empires, could crumble from pride. That men with power often forgot the simplest truth. The woman beside you is not your reflection. She's your compass. And Gabriel listened. The next day at a public business summit, Melissa made her move. Cameras caught her gliding toward him, poised, confident, dripping with charm. She spoke about strategic alliances, legacy mergers, and how a man like him deserved a woman who understood the cost of ambition. The moment hung like a test. Every eye in the room was watching. But Gabriel didn't flinch. He smiled, not politely but firmly, and said something that ended the whispers once and for all. He told her that alliances built on vanity never last, but the one built on love had already changed him more than any company ever could. The cameras flashed. Melissa's smile faltered, and by evening, her name had vanished from every headline that mattered. That night when he came home, the lights in the penthouse were soft. Lana sat by the window reading, her hand resting on her stomach. He walked over, kissed her forehead, and for a long moment, they didn't speak. They didn't have to. Because what they had now, this fragile, quiet, imperfect life, was finally theirs. No contracts, no power games. Just two hearts and one future on the way. When Eleanor visited that weekend, she brought a silver rattle from the Costa archives, one that had belonged to Gabriel's great-grandfather. She placed it on the coffee table and looked at Lana for a long time. Her eyes, sharp as ever, softened. "You know, I used to think you were after what we had," she said quietly, "but now I see. You're the reason we still have it." And for the first time, Lana saw the matriarch smile not as a test, but as approval. The rain had stopped outside. The city sparkled again, alive and golden. Lana watched Gabriel work at his desk that night, sleeves rolled up, hair falling slightly out of place, and thought, "This isn't the man I married by accident. This is the man I was meant to meet when I was finally ready to love without fear." And as she rested her hand on her belly, feeling the faintest flutter of life, she whispered to herself, This was the plan all along." There are nights when the city itself seems to hold its breath, when power, beauty, and danger gather under the same chandelier, and one truth can shatter everything. That night was one of them. The annual Metropolitan Charity Gala had always been the crown jewel of New York's social calendar, a fusion of art, influence, and ego dressed in designer gowns. For the Costa family, it wasn't just an appearance. It was a battlefield wrapped in silk and champagne, and this year the stakes were higher than ever. Lana Costa stood at the base of the grand staircase, the soft fabric of her navy gown flowing like liquid midnight. Her husband Gabriel stood beside her, elegant, restrained, unreadable as ever. They were the couple everyone whispered about. The story of scandal turned success. The marriage that wasn't supposed to last, and yet somehow had. But behind the flash of cameras and the polite smiles, tension burned like hidden fire. Because across the marble hall stood Marcelo Costa, Gabriel's father, a man born into wealth and convinced he owned the world. And beside him, poised like a predator disguised as perfection, was Melissa Hawthorne. Her presence wasn't an accident. Her family's empire had been bleeding money for years, and Marcelo saw her as the perfect lifeline, a merger wrapped in diamonds. What he didn't see, or refused to see, was that the cost of such an alliance would be his son's happiness and his legacy. The evening unfolded with the precision of a performance. Crystal chandeliers glimmered over walls of gold. Champagne flowed like liquid glass. Photographers circled, catching smiles that hid daggers. Lana moved through it all with grace, but her intuition whispered that something was wrong. Gabriel was tense. His father avoided looking at her, and Melissa, always smiling, always near, was too rehearsed to be innocent. Then during the formal toast, it happened. Marcelo stepped onto the stage. The orchestra softened. The crowd turned. In a voice rich with authority, he began to speak, praising his family, his legacy, the company's future. He spoke of strategic partnerships, global alliances, and honoring family traditions. Then his words turned sharp. He announced an intended merger between Costa Tech and Hawthorne Industries, calling it a union of vision and lineage. The audience applauded politely, unaware of the storm those words would unleash. But Lana understood. Marcelo wasn't talking about business. He was talking about Gabriel, about marrying him to Melissa to seal the deal. Her hands went cold. She looked at Gabriel, but he remained motionless, his jaw tight. And then, before anyone could speak, a new voice cut through the applause. Calm, elegant, deadly. Eleanor Costa. She rose from her seat near the center table, poised, regal, commanding silence without a word. The orchestra stopped. The chatter faded. Eleanor had always been a figure of quiet power, respected, feared, and rarely challenged. But tonight she was more than that. She was judgment embodied. She walked slowly toward the stage, her silver gown trailing like moonlight. And when she spoke, her voice carried through the hall with the clarity of truth. Marcelo, she said, I didn't authorize this announcement. The crowd turned. Gasps rippled like a wave. Marcelo's smile faltered. It's business, Eleanor. The board, she interrupted, answers to me. A murmur spread. The room shifted. Cameras began to flash. Eleanor looked around, not at the guests, not at the journalists, but straight at Lana. And while we're making announcements, let's make the real one. The hall went silent. Even the chandeliers seemed to dim. Eleanor turned back to her husband, the man she had built an empire beside, but who had spent years trying to control it. Tonight, she said, I am ending not just a business partnership, but a marriage built on convenience, arrogance, and betrayal. As of tomorrow morning, I am filing for divorce. The air cracked. Marcelo stood frozen, the color draining from his face. The whispers turned into chaos. Divorce? Now? Here? But Eleanor wasn't finished. She reached into her clutch and produced a thin, folded document, already signed. And effective immediately, she continued, I am transferring 55% of Costa Tech Holdings to Mrs. Lana Costa. A collective gasp erupted. Even Gabriel looked stunned. Lana stood there unmoving, the cameras flashing around her, the world spinning. Eleanor continued, her tone soft but unyielding. The future of this family and this company belongs to integrity, not ambition. And this woman, she said, looking at Lana, is the only one in this room who still remembers what that word means. The hall was chaos now. Reporters shouting, flashes blinding, voices overlapping. Melissa, pale and furious, stormed toward the exit, her heels striking the marble like gunfire. Marcelo tried to speak, but no words came. Decades of control, power, and pride evaporated in one public moment of reckoning. And Gabriel, he didn't move. He simply turned to his mother, then to his wife. And in that silence, everyone saw it, the changing of an era. Later, when the lights dimmed and the guests began to leave, Lana stood alone for a moment at the edge of the balcony overlooking Central Park. The air outside was cool, heavy with the scent of rain. She could still hear the echoes of that night, the gas, the camera shutters, the sharp sound of one world ending and another beginning. But beneath it all was something else, a calm she hadn't known before. Because for the first time, she wasn't standing behind anyone's shadow. She was no longer the woman who had married by mistake, nor the one constantly proving she belonged. Now she was the Costa name, the heart of it, the leader of it. And somewhere deep down, she knew this wasn't just about business. It was about justice. The kind that doesn't shout, but changes everything simply by being right. In business, victory often feels like silence, the quiet that follows after every storm has passed. For Lana Costa, that silence came 3 weeks after the night that changed everything. The Met Gala that tore down empires and rebuilt her life in a single breath. The world now knew her name. No longer the woman who married into wealth, no longer the scandal bride. She was the new chairwoman of Costa Tech Holdings, holding 55% of the company. A title that carried both glory and gravity. But power, she learned, wasn't just about leading. It was about closing chapters with grace. And one chapter still waited. The one bearing the name Madeline Winters. Madeline had vanished after her exposure. No interviews, no statements, no defense. Her name had quietly disappeared from the hospitality circuits where she once reigned. But Lana knew silence rarely meant peace. It meant guilt. It meant wounds that hadn't healed. And she couldn't build a future with ghosts still whispering behind her. So one gray afternoon, in a glass office high above the Hudson River, Lana asked for Madeline to be brought in. When the elevator doors opened, the woman who stepped out was a shadow of her former self. The power-suited arrogance was gone, replaced by something smaller. Humility, maybe shame. There were no cameras this time, no audience to watch. Only two women who had once been enemies, sitting across from each other, separated by a decade of pride and a thin sheet of polished glass. Lana didn't start with anger. She didn't need to. The evidence of betrayal, the altered reports, the forged signature, the falsified data that had nearly cost her everything, sat quietly in a folder on her desk. She didn't open it. She didn't have to. They both knew what it contained. In her mind, she replayed every moment that had led here. The humiliation, the rumors, the traps. She could have destroyed Madeline completely, legally, financially, even socially. But instead, Lana had asked herself a different question. What kind of leader do I want to be remembered as? Because vengeance is loud, but justice is quiet, and quiet lasts longer. The meeting lasted less than 30 minutes, but it changed everything. No shouting, no accusations, just truth spoken calmly. Lana didn't offer comfort, but she offered clarity. She acknowledged the damage, the betrayal, and the wasted potential. And then she did something unexpected. She handed Madeline a sealed envelope. Inside there were two things: a neutral letter of recommendation, carefully worded, neither glowing nor condemning, and a 3-month severance package, enough to let her start over. There would be no lawsuit, no public humiliation, no revenge. It was a message that said, you've been judged, you've been forgiven, but you will live with what you've done. Because true punishment wasn't losing everything. It was knowing what you'd thrown away and being forced to face it every day after. When Madeline left, the city stretched before her, vast, bright, and indifferent. She didn't look back. She didn't thank her. She didn't cry. But Lana knew that somewhere, beneath the pride and regret, something inside that woman had broken just enough for humility to grow. That was enough. In the days that followed, whispers moved through the corridors of Costa Tech. People expected a public statement, a press release, a warning to others who might dare to betray the new chairwoman. But none came. Instead, Lana issued a quiet internal memo, short, simple, and profound. Mistakes are inevitable. Integrity is a choice. We learn from both. The message spread faster than any scandal ever could. Not because it demanded fear, but because it inspired respect. Employees who once walked on eggshells around her now walked taller, prouder, knowing they worked for someone who valued conscience more than control. Even Gabriel noticed it. The empire his family had built through decades of strategy was now being held together by something stronger than legacy, by empathy. And Eleanor, watching from her office across the river, understood that the torch had truly passed. The Costa Empire was no longer built on pride, but on purpose. One evening, as the sun set over Manhattan, Lana stood at her office window, the skyline glowing gold beneath her. The city that once terrified her now bowed quietly at her feet. She thought of Madeline, somewhere out there, rebuilding her life. She thought of Eleanor, finally free from a marriage built on appearances. She thought of Gabriel, who had once hidden behind control but now found peace in vulnerability. And she thought of herself, the girl who once yelled at the wrong millionaire in a café, and somehow became the woman who now led an empire with grace. Power hadn't changed her. It had revealed her. That night, she wrote a note in her private journal, something she would never share publicly, but that would guide her for years to come. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's choosing to heal when revenge would be easier. It's remembering, not to punish, but to protect what's left of your own humanity. When she closed the notebook, the world outside seemed a little quieter, the air a little lighter. Because the story of Lana Costa had started with anger and ended with peace, not because she won every battle, but because she finally understood that victory isn't about conquering others. It's about mastering yourself. Love, when it's real, doesn't need grand beginnings. It only needs the courage to start again, this time for the right reasons. For Lana Costa, that truth unfolded one golden evening at the very top of the Costa Tower, the same place where power and ambition once defined her life. Now it was quiet. The city spread below like a sea of lights, and for the first time, this rooftop, once a symbol of pressure and prestige, had been transformed into something softer, almost magical. Fairy lights twined through ivory roses. Lanterns floated in glass bowls. And at the center of it all stood Gabriel, waiting. He had spent weeks planning every detail in secret. It wasn't about extravagance this time. It was about meaning, about rewriting their story from duty to devotion. The man who once signed marriage papers out of convenience was now standing beneath a sky full of stars, ready to ask the same woman to be his wife, again, this time, for love. When Lana stepped out of the elevator, she froze. The entire rooftop looked like a garden suspended above the city. Every light shimmered like a heartbeat. Every petal glowed against the night. And there, at the center, Gabriel turned. No suit, no boardroom armor, just a man with open eyes and steady hands. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The wind carried the hum of the city far below, the sound of taxis and laughter, and life continuing. And yet, up here, everything was still. Then quietly, he knelt. No flash of cameras, no audience, just two people, bound by every mistake and every miracle that had brought them here. The first time they married, it was because of fear of scandal, fear of shame. This time, it was because of faith. The first time, there were contracts. This time, there was trust. The first time, it was survival. Now it was surrender. And when Lana nodded, tears tracing her smile, the city below seemed to exhale with her. 3 weeks later, on a crisp afternoon in Central Park, the world witnessed what love looked like when it was reborn. The ceremony wasn't extravagant. It was alive. No chandeliers, no elite guest lists, just sunlight filtering through trees, wildflowers scattered along the aisle, and the laughter of people who had finally learned to believe in second chances. Lana, radiant in a flowing ivory gown, carried not just flowers, but life itself, 8 months pregnant. Her hands resting on the curve of their future. The crowd, a blend of colleagues, friends, and even a few former rivals, watched in silence as she walked toward Gabriel, who waited beneath an arch of roses. He looked at her not like a man meeting his bride, but like someone seeing home for the first time. Even the air seemed to pause. That fragile, golden kind of quiet that only happens when everything is finally right. But the moment that etched itself into everyone's heart came during the speech. Not from the couple, but from Eleanor Costa, the matriarch who had once controlled every detail of their lives. When she took the microphone, the crowd held its breath. She looked at her son, then at her daughter-in-law, her eyes softer than anyone had ever seen. And then she said something that silenced even the wind. "Fate," she began, "isn't about luck. It's about timing. Sometimes destiny needs a push, a mistake, a misunderstanding, even a little chaos, to reveal what was meant all along." Her gaze lingered on Lana. "I once thought I orchestrated this union, but now I see I was only the storm that helped them find their way through the rain. What they built, this family, this love, belongs entirely to them." Applause broke through the emotion. Even the cameras, clicking discreetly from afar, caught the shimmer of tears on the face of a woman who had built empires, yet finally learned the true meaning of legacy. That evening, as the celebration faded into twilight, the newlyweds retreated to the Plaza Hotel where their story had once begun. The same skyline stretched beyond the windows, but everything felt new, gentler, fuller, truer. The room was filled with flowers from friends, cards from employees, and gifts from people whose lives had been touched by their story. Proof that power, when paired with kindness, could heal more than it could hurt. Lana sat by the window, her hands resting protectively over her stomach, watching the lights flicker across the park. She thought of how far they had come, from strangers forced together to partners who now dreamed of raising a child with everything they had learned: patience, humility, grace. Gabriel joined her, his arms slipping around her shoulders. For once, he didn't speak in strategies or statistics. He simply said, "We're going to do this right." And she believed him. Because the man beside her wasn't just the CEO who had ruled an empire. He was the husband who had finally learned to love beyond fear. That night, as they fell asleep to the sound of rain against the windows, the city outside glowed like a blessing. In a world obsessed with beginnings, they had found beauty in beginning again. Because sometimes the greatest love stories aren't the ones that start perfectly. They're the ones that survive the storm and bloom again, brighter than before. Every story has a beginning, but not every story earns its ending. For Lana Costa, the woman who once yelled at the wrong millionaire in a cafe on Park Avenue, her ending wasn't written in glitter or gold. It was written in grace. The world now knew her name, not as a rumor, not as a scandal, but as the woman who turned chaos into compassion, betrayal into wisdom, and power into purpose. She had become something far rarer than the richest or the most admired. She had become respected. From the outside, her life looked perfect. A family empire thriving under her leadership, a husband who had learned to love without conditions, and a child soon to be born into a world already waiting for its heir. But what most people didn't see were the invisible threads, the quiet redemptions that tied every piece of her journey together. She didn't forget Ava Ruiz, the young woman once accused of theft. Ava now managed 2 hotels under the Meridian name, mentoring others the way Lana once guided her, with patience and fairness. She didn't forget Deshaun Price, the janitor who confessed to his desperate mistake. He became the coordinator of Costa Group's foundation program, overseeing initiatives that helped employees in crisis. And she didn't forget Madeline Winters, her rival, her reminder of what unchecked ambition could destroy. Lana's decision not to destroy her had become one of her greatest victories. Forgiveness hadn't been weakness. It had been her final proof of strength. Even Eleanor Costa, the formidable matriarch, had changed. The woman who once ruled with an iron will now lived in quiet dignity, watching from the sidelines as her son and daughter-in-law rebuilt the Costa legacy. Not with fear, but with faith. Sometimes she would joke that she'd been the unintentional Cupid, forcing destiny's hand. But everyone knew she had simply given fate a push at the right time toward the right people. Under Lana's leadership, Costa Tech transformed. It wasn't just a business empire anymore. It became a place where people mattered as much as numbers. She launched ethics reforms, mentorship programs, and partnerships with local communities. The kinds of things no quarterly report could measure, but every life could feel. In a world obsessed with profit, she dared to make principle profitable. And perhaps that was the true twist all along, that the woman everyone underestimated had been the missing piece the empire needed to remember its soul. Her story wasn't about wealth, it never had been. It was about how power tests people, and how sometimes the ones who start with nothing see the truth more clearly than those born into everything. Because the higher you rise, the easier it is to forget what ground feels like. And the bravest thing anyone can do is remember. One evening, months after the second wedding, Lana sat on the balcony of their home. The city glowed beneath her. The same skyline that once made her feel small now looked like something she had helped build. Gabriel joined her quietly, holding their newborn daughter. The baby stirred, tiny fingers curling around his hand. For a long time, they didn't speak. They didn't need to. The silence said everything about what they had lost, what they had fought for, and what they had become. Once upon a time, he had believed strength meant control. Now he understood it meant vulnerability, the courage to love and be changed by it. And she, the woman who once believed fairness would always lose against power, had learned that the two could coexist if someone dared to lead differently. That was their gift to the world. Proof that redemption isn't a miracle. It's a choice. As night deepened, Lana thought of all the faces that had crossed her path. The kind, the cruel, the broken, and the brave. She thought of the younger version of herself, walking into that café with fire in her heart and too much to prove. If she could speak to that girl now, she'd tell her, "Don't apologize for your anger. It's the beginning of justice. But don't let it harden you. That's the end of compassion." Because that was the moral twist. The truth behind the entire journey. The rich weren't always cruel. The poor weren't always pure. Goodness had no class, and cruelty had no price tag. The true divide wasn't between rich and poor. It was between those who remembered their humanity and those who forgot. As dawn broke, light spilled across the city, catching the glass towers and turning them gold. Lana closed her eyes, letting the warmth touch her face. The child in her arms stirred. Somewhere in that moment, she realized the legacy they would leave behind wasn't measured in wealth, but in the quiet ripple of better choices. Her husband's redemption, her mother-in-law's forgiveness, her employees' faith, her own peace. Everything that mattered had come not from the fight for power, but from the willingness to let it mean something. And so, as the city woke, she whispered the words that had carried her through it all, words simple enough for anyone to understand, but hard enough to live by. True worth has nothing to do with titles, and sometimes the poorest heart saves the richest soul. Because in the end, that's what her story had been. Not a fairy tale, not a scandal, but a mirror held up to every heart still learning what it means to love bravely and lead kindly. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapter of love, power, and redemption. Leave a simple 1 if you felt moved, or a 0 if it didn't reach you yet, because your feedback helps us tell better stories for hearts just like yours. And don't forget to share this story with someone who believes that kindness still wins, even in a world built on ambition. The next story begins soon, and trust me, you don't want to miss it.